Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky meets the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. United Nations condemns Russian missile attack in Dnipro as a possible war crime. And Atomic Energy Agency's Rafael Grossi is in Ukraine to work to prevent an accident at its nuclear power plants. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has met with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, a chairman in office and Minister of Foreign Affairs of North Macedonia, Buja Osmani. Mr. Zelensky asked the OSCE for greater action in two key areas of concern: of the forced deportation of children and women to the Russian Federation, as well as the conditions of captivity of Ukrainian prisoners of war. On January the 9th, Russia and Ukraine each returned 50 captured soldiers in the latest prisoner swap within this war. Ukraine had said the returnees included fighters from Mariupol and Chernobyl. Meanwhile, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned the Russian missile attack on an apartment building in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro as a possible war crime. The associate spokesperson for the Secretary General, Stefan Tremblay, said a strike hit a residential building in Dnipro over the weekend and in one of the deadliest attacks in Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion last February. She adds that the Secretary General condemned the attack, saying this was another example of a suspected violation of the laws of war. However, the UN coordinator in Ukraine, Denise Brown, has called for an effective investigation of suspected war crimes and appropriate prosecution of subjects. Meanwhile, Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has said Sweden condemns Russia's attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure and civilian targets, including the attack against the residential block in Dnipro.
The Swedish government condemns in the strongest terms Russia's continuing systemic attacks against civilians, civilian objects and critical infrastructure in Ukraine, including Saturday's missile strike on an apartment block in the town of Dnipro. So let me be very clear. Intentional attacks against civilians are war crimes. Those responsible for war crimes will be held to account.
And German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has called for a special tribunal to prosecute Russian leaders over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Ms. Baerbock called for, quote, a new format of court to bring Russian leaders to justice for their invasion of Ukraine, possibly using Ukrainian law, but based abroad within international judgments. Ms. Baerbock said this in a speech to the Hague Academy of International Law, where she intoned that, quote, we need to voice a clear message to the Russian leadership here and now that a war of aggression will not go unpunished. And Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko says Kiev's infrastructure could collapse at any second as Russia's sporadic missile attacks, along with freezing winter temperatures, put local authorities under increasing strain. The mayor said Ukraine's Western allies had to speed up deliveries of air defense systems capable of downing Russian missiles. Kiev has accused Moscow of indiscriminately targeting civilians as well as key infrastructure, threatening the winter supply of electricity, running water, and central heating.
We don't talk about the collapse, but can happen any second, because any second Russian rockets can destroy our critical infrastructure in our hometown in Kiev, and not just in Kiev and other cities. That's why we have a deficit of energy around 30% right now in Kiev. Now in Ukraine, pretty cold. -10, -20, sometime in winter -30 degrees, and in this weather condition, to live without electricity, to live without heating, it's almost impossible. And that's why situation is critical. We fighting to surviving.
Meanwhile, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency says the agency's priority in Ukraine is to ensure the security and safety of the country's nuclear power plants. Mr. Rafael Grossi made the comments during a visit to the southern Ukrainian nuclear power plant in Yuzhno-Russk. Mr. Grossi adds that the priority above all other things was to prevent an accident and ensure the plant was in an operational condition.
This is a part of a set of missions we are starting today here at South Ukraine. We are going to be continuing in Rivne, Khmelnytsky next week, and also Chernobyl. The priority now is to ensure the security and the safety of the plant. It doesn't matter what we can discuss at this moment on high legal issues. What we need to prevent is an accident, and what we need to make sure is that this plant is in safe condition, is in an operational condition, and that we prevent this tragedy from happening. So we are leaving now a group of experts who are going to be staying here permanently, and it will be the same in all these other places, working hand in hand with our Ukrainian hosts to facilitate some technical support, delivery of equipment, to make sure that all these facilities that are so important for the country, and especially at this very difficult time, can continue running normally and without any problem.
All right, let's talk now to Rory Finnin, who is Associate Professor of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. Hi, Rory. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, Ladim. Nice to see you again. Yes,
nice to see you. Quite a lot has happened since we spoke last, so let me begin with what is currently happening, and that is this issue about war crimes and bringing people to account. How difficult do you think that could be, especially when, I mean, first of all, let's take it from the viewpoint that in war, all is deemed fair because everything is on the table, so to speak, because at the end of the day, what is important is victory. But secondly, you are talking about one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council in Russia. So there's been no precedent of bringing people from any of the 5 Security Council members to book in situations like this.
That's a really important question. There are a number of aspects to it. First is that if we recall Russia's invasion of Finland earlier in the 20th century, that invasion caused the League of Nations, which existed at the time before the United Nations, to expel Russia. So there's a precedent here. I think there's a really complicated and sophisticated legal argument to say actually that Russia has no business standing as the legal successor to the Soviet Union in the United Nations, that they did not go about this properly, they did not file the appropriate paperwork and documents to attest to that right to a seat in the Security Council. It was effectively just given to them. I think the case for expelling Russia from the Security Council is extremely strong, and I think it's a matter of simply diplomatic will. And also, to the first part of your question, Ladi, I think it's important for everyone to step back and understand how this entire invasion, and again, I applaud your program for always framing it as a Russian invasion of Ukraine, not a Ukraine conflict or Ukraine war, because the Kremlin is driving everything here. And this war would end immediately if they left the country and left Ukraine to its internationally recognized borders. The issue here is the entire war is itself a crime. And it's very, very important for all of us to understand the genocidal intent that the Kremlin openly, explicitly claims that's driving its war effort. So you mentioned the deportation, the abduction of children from Ukraine. According to the Genocide Convention, that is indeed an act of genocide. And then we have this unmitigated, brutal, cowardly war against Ukrainian civilians, as we saw on Saturday, when a missile designed to harm an aircraft carrier, was sent into a major residential building with scores dead, crying beneath the rubble. These scenes are very much part of Russia's war plan, and that deserves our collective global disdain and condemnation.
Let me come to something else which might be considered troubling as well, and that is the fact that at the start of this, many of the countries in Europe, particularly what you refer to as the Western allies, the UK, France, Germany, and then the United States, restricted themselves to giving Ukraine defensive weapons. As you said, it was Russia that went into Ukraine, so they restricted themselves to giving defensive weapons. But as this year started, and I'm talking about 2023, it seems as if that restriction or that restraint has been removed. You've got the British now sending Challenger 2 tanks. You've got the Germans sending Marder fighting vehicles. You've got the US sending Bradley fighting vehicles, and there is now talk of sending the Leopard 2 tanks, which Germany produces and which are highly effective. But does all of this not risk escalating the conflict? Because that would make all these countries that are making these donations or giving this weaponry to Ukraine co-combatants, as the Russians had said previously.
If you recall, when Putin initially announced this so-called special military operation, which of course is a war, a word that is not allowed to be used in Russian civil society for fear of imprisonment. That speaks to an essential weakness that's almost impossible to really fathom. But initially in 2022, there were a lot of claims, as you all know, that Ukraine would be defeated effectively in a period of days. Now, anybody who spent time in Ukraine understands that that wasn't going to be the case. And I think it's taken a long time for various Western governments, various Western defense ministers to understand that, first of all, Ukraine can be trusted with this military technology, that Ukrainians are not interested in waging war against the Russian people. This is not some sort of inter-ethnic conflict. The sites that the Ukrainian military is hitting inside Russia are military installations that are currently serving as platforms and launch pads to harm the Ukrainian civilian population, to take out their critical infrastructure, as you saw earlier, to make people cold, hungry, to make them suffer. So those are the strategic objectives of the Ukrainian military. They are simply pursuing their legal right to self-defense, and they're doing it effectively, efficiently, I think with a lot of morale in the Ukrainian populace that has suffered immensely and continues to suffer immensely, but also understands what they're up against, which is an existential threat. Now, if I turn on Russian state television right now, which I do sadly almost every day, we will see propagandists and mouthpieces on television celebrating this effort against the Ukrainian civilians, to talk about wiping out an entire country with a kind of joy, sadly. It's a very sickening sight to see what's going on Russian state television. So this effort to wipe out an entire European country, and not only that, to decimate this people and its identity, they're very clear about that. So I think the Western military support has been, unfortunately, slow to come when it comes to pushing back the Russian invaders fully. But they understand now that this aggression is potentially boundless, and it's bound to test Poland, the Baltic states as well. So the Western allies have understood that it's important to defeat Russians in the battle space now before this escalates even further.
Now, you did mention there that there was some slowness in coming to the realization that the Ukrainians weren't just going to fold up and admit defeat on the part of the Western countries. But do you perhaps think also that because of that delay, something akin to some level of fatigue, support fatigue that is, may be coming up, especially because the two biggest countries that have been singularly responsible for most of what support Ukraine has gotten are the United States and the United Kingdom, where you are. But then also both of them have been affected now by more internal distractions, if you like. In the case of the UK, We're having strikes over cost of living. The political establishment is battling with the after effects of Brexit. In the United States, preparations are now on for all kinds of investigations of both President Biden and former President Trump. So perhaps there might be some kind of shift in focus away from this war because it has, as you said, dragged on for much longer than anyone expected.
And I think we're in for this war continuing for the foreseeable future. And I think you're right that any war confronts the problem of fatigue. And that's why it's important for us to understand what it's about. And I think for a lot of people who may be casually tuning into various programs may think that this is a war about, Russian speakers in Ukraine or some sort of eternal conflict between Ukrainians and Russians. It's not that. It's a very simple and a very tragically simple war in which an aggressor state has decided to wipe out a neighbor, and for no real good reason strategically other than to conquer, to steal, to take natural resources, and to also promote a vision of greatness that is historical. So I think the fatigue question is always a problem, but we need to understand that what we're experiencing is Russia fatigue. No one wanted this invasion. There were diplomatic efforts, very intense prior to the 24th of February 2022, in which the entire world, first of all, particularly the United States, acknowledged that an invasion was coming, but the entire world rallied to prevent one. This serves no one's interest. We all suffer through this war. This was something that no one asked for, certainly not the Ukrainian people. So unfortunately, we have no real comfort in remaining fatigued. We have to steady our focus. It shouldn't be something that I think divides various political parties, but naturally it will in the world that we live in now, particularly with social media, where everyone gains by being the loudest voice in the room. But I think what we're seeing in the United States is potentially a signal that the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party is, one, succumbing to a lot of Russian disinformation about the conflict, and indeed fatiguing. And that's something we need to work against and keep educating and informing viewers and audiences about the grave human stakes of this war. It's not something that's confined to the region. It has global resonance. And one might even say this notion of a third world war, which scares everyone. No one wants this to pursue. No one wants this to proceed into something much more global. But in effect, in terms of economics, diplomacy, it's already taking place, that the globe is engaged in this conflict one way or the other. We see a logic from the Kremlin, which is effectively pure and naked aggression. And that, unfortunately, we have time and time again seen over centuries that when confronted by an aggressor state, there's really no way to compromise. That aggression needs to be defeated. And so that's what is facing all of us right now.
I can let you go, Rory, before asking you about this. There's a broader, it seems, narrative that is going on here. Ukraine stands only as a template for what is either happening, about to happen, or is thought to be about to happen in other places. You've got the Chinese and Taiwan, you've got the North and South Koreans, you've got the Japanese now ramping up their defense and all of that. Perhaps something is bound to fall through the cracks at some point while everybody's attention is focused on Ukraine, because there's so many other potential flashpoints. I just remembered now, China is also facing off with India over borders. So again, do you harbor that fear as someone who looks at things like this?
Absolutely. I think all of us harbor this fear. All of us want to live in a peaceful world. And we have to admit, Western powers that are supplying Ukraine with weapons right now have been among the most, let's say, casual with respect to international law. The United States invaded Iraq in contravention of international law. There are a lot of mistakes that the United Kingdom, Western European countries, the United States have made with respect to violating international law. That is absolutely clear. What we have to do is return to principles that every state has the sovereign right to exist, and that people should be allowed to pursue a life of their own in full cultural agency, allowed to speak their language, allowed to teach their children in the way that they see fit. And unfortunately, what we need to do now is stand up against a campaign to completely eviscerate that principle. This is not just a corrosion of international law and a penetration of another country's borders. Again, it's an attempt to destroy an entire people and to wipe the largest country within the European continent off the map. And so there's only one way to respond to that, and it's to stop it. And in doing so, we can also affirm the principle of international law, the principle of every state, no matter its size, having sovereignty. Then I think we'll all be teaching ourselves, reminding ourselves of important lessons that the West in particular needs to understand. And in that way, we might forestall some of these other brewing conflicts. I think if Russia is allowed to succeed in any way here, it sends a message to any potential state that as long as, one, they have nuclear weapons, they can do whatever they want, they can take whatever they want. And in that kind of world, we're all in trouble.
Indeed. Rory Fitting, Associate Professor of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
And after the break, Britain urges Germany to permit supply of tanks to Ukraine. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. A shipload of U.S. military hardware has arrived in the Danish port of Aarhus ahead of a series of training exercises across NATO's eastern frontier countries. The U.S. Army's 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cavalry Division, Fort Hood, Texas, is arriving in Europe for a 9-month rotation as part of, quote, Atlantic Resolve, a NATO operation which the U.S. Army says provides rotational deployments of combat-ready forces to Europe.
We are downloading 2nd Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division, who arrived here from Fort Hood, Texas. They're here as part of the Atlantic Resolve NATO-led training exercise. They'll be in Europe for around 9 months. And what we're doing this morning specifically is downloading their equipment off of the vessel behind me.
In the meantime, Slovakia has completed the delivery of 8 Susanna II howitzers ordered by Ukraine last year. Its defense minister, Yaroslav Nart, said, quote, as of today, we have handed over to Ukraine a complete battery of high-quality artillery systems produced by our own defense ministry. He adds that with this help, Ukrainian defenders will be able to save as many lives as possible and bring their homeland closer to unconditional victory over the enemy. And Ukrainian soldiers have arrived in the United States to learn how to use the Patriot air defense system in hopes of protecting against Russian missile attacks. The Ukrainian personnel arrived on Sunday evening at Fort Sill in the state of Oklahoma for training at the U.S. Army Air Defense Artillery School, and that's according to Colonel Curtis King. Washington promised a Patriot battery which fires missiles to take out missiles to Ukraine late last year to help counter relentless aerial attacks by Moscow. The British Defense Secretary says that Ukraine needed a new level of support to expel Russian troops from its territory after announcing the donation of main battle tanks for the country. Ben Wallace said that the United Kingdom would send a squadron of Challenger 2 tanks with armored recovery and repair vehicles to Ukraine, calling it the most significant package of combat power to date to accelerate Ukrainian success. Mr. Wallace said it is the first time that Western main battle tanks will be sent to Ukraine, adding that UK would send Ukraine AS-90 self-propelled artillery and hundreds more armored and protective vehicles. And Britain has urged Germany to permit the supply of Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, stressing that it could unlock support from other nations and Berlin would not be acting alone if it supplied its own tanks. British Defense Minister Ben Wallace outlined further military support for Ukraine as well.
On the area of the Leopard coalition, I think as they're calling themselves, it has been reported that obviously Poland is very keen to donate some Leopard, as is Finland, who have expressed. All of this currently relies on the German government's decisions, not only whether the Germans will supply their own Leopards, but whether or not they'll give permissions for others. I would urge my German colleagues to do that. These tanks are not offensive when they are used for defensive methods. There's a debate in Germany at the moment about whether a tank is an offensive weapon or a defensive weapon. Well, it depends what you're using it for. If you're using it to defend your country, I would wager that it is a defensive weapon system. Secondly, we are not on our own. This is a joint international coalition, and I know there have been concerns in the German political body that they don't want to go alone. Well, they're not alone, and I think the conference in Ramstein will show that.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has promised the German arms industry long-term contracts as he turned weapons manufacturer Hensoldt. While politicians are pressuring Germany's arms producers to build up more capacity in order to deliver weapons and ammunition to Ukraine more quickly, defense companies are demanding assurances that the investments will pay off even after the war in Ukraine is over. Mr. Scholz also stressed that Germany had already supplied Ukraine with many weapons systems, including howitzers, multiple rocket launchers, and anti-aircraft tanks. We will continue all of this. Let's talk to Ambassador Humphrey Ojiako, Nigeria's former representative to Switzerland and Liechtenstein. He joins us from the nation's capital, Abuja. Good morning to you, Your Excellency. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. It's good to be with you today.
Let me begin with that. What I've just read now, that the Germans are coming under increased pressure to allow the supply of heavy weaponry to Ukraine. But the Chancellor is naturally reluctant to do this by himself, except as part of a broad coalition of Europe and America in sync. We all know that Germany's history, especially when it comes to war, dictates that most of its population is very anti-war. They're not interested in getting into any conflict anywhere. And the Russians have said that, look, if this goes ahead, that would make Germany a co-combatant in the crisis, which most Germans don't want. Is this fair to the Germans to put them under so much pressure?
You have kind of hit the nail on the head. That is German history, recent history. And many of the actors in that recent history of the First and Second World War, but the Second World War in particular, are still alive. And the impact of that war on the German psyche is not one that encourages any military adventurism of any kind. And bearing in mind that Russia and Germany do have common borders, actually. So it is more difficult, historically speaking, for Germany to take anything that could be interpreted as a lead in supporting Ukraine here. I suppose that's the reason they are looking for this coalition, a coalition of the Western allies led by the United States. Britain is beginning to respond to that need to give Germany the cover they need to begin to send more offensive military equipment to Ukraine. The United States itself is, as the news is reporting now, is acting up, raising its own military equipment supplies to Ukraine. Of course, Britain is now virtually in the front line, giving Germany the cover it needs. What all this leads to, actually, is a kind of gradual escalation of the Ukraine war. I don't know where this is going to end, where it is heading to, because from the word go, the worry of some people who have no direct interest in that war was, what was Russia's strategic objective for invading Ukraine? Up to today, it is still a battle. Is it really these tendencies towards genocide, towards destroying the entire social and economic infrastructure of Ukraine? The various kinds of missile attacks that target civilian institutions, even residential areas like the recent one in Dnipro. What do they signify? Are these not actually tending towards genocide? And what can the international community do about it? Must Russia be stopped by a stronger military force, or is there still any room for finding a solution to this? Because it's beginning to degenerate. It's beginning to creep into something definitely the world does not need. And that's a worry.
Now, Ambassador, I'm happy you mentioned that, because the search for peace, however it goes, is what most people are interested in, just like you are. And the one country has been so far most effective in this regard with regards to this conflict. That's the war in Ukraine here, and that is Turkey. Turkey has been front and center. It seems to have been trusted by both sides. Somehow President Erdogan has maintained good relations with President Putin and President Zelensky. He's able to talk to both of them. And more recently as over the weekend, there was a phone call between President Erdogan and President Putin, where President Putin said to him, look, we offered a truce here, and the Ukrainians said they were not interested over the Orthodox Christmas holiday. So the point would be that in as much as we want peace, does it appear that we are going to get peace at any point, since it now appears as if the mediator, whose credibility is at the highest, is now beginning to see, as it says, that, look, both sides are not interested in talking?
You know, it is so difficult to, in this time and age, to breach another country's sovereign rights, to breach its sovereignty, occupy almost 27-28% of its territory. And you are talking of truce. This is absolutely against international law. For Russia to continue to stay in Ukraine, commit the kind of war crimes, one should say, we are seeing, like this attack on civilian buildings and residential houses and homes, and destroying people like that. And then in the midst of that, they are talking of truce. What kind of truce really is that? Again, unfortunately, yes, Turkey, as the president of Turkey, may have some listening ears, both in Moscow and in Kiev. But it does not have the wherewithal. It does not have the power, the real power, to compel any of them to do anything, because what is at stake is the sovereignty of a country. Do you want to wipe Ukraine out of the map? Do you want to take Ukraine back into, are you trying to rebuild the old Soviet Union? There has to be a proper definition of Russia's strategic goals in Ukraine before you can actually talk of any serious peace negotiations. What does Russia want? Ukraine's need is very clear. It wants to enjoy what every other sovereign country in the world is sometimes we take for granted, even in troubled Africa. Why can't Ukraine have that? Why not talk in terms of probably returning the original areas that caused conflict in 2014 until the escalation in 2022? maybe that's where Russia should be offering something. Let's talk about the semi-autonomy of those Southeast Ukrainian provinces. But to be dealing this barrage of incessant missile attacks on it, they're simply dismantling Ukraine. They're simply destroying the country. So I don't see how any peace process could hold under such a circumstance until Putin actually probably begins to suffer the war fatigue himself, probably when his own authority in Russia becomes endangered as the war drags on. If he thought that this war was going to end in a few days, in a few weeks, I think that illusion has cleared from his ears now. So, and the determination shown by the Ukrainians so far, the war is going into its 400th day. 400 days. That is a long time for a superpower to engage in whatever it is doing in Ukraine, and it's still going on without any appearance of letting up. When will Russia get fatigued? Would the West supporting Ukraine be tired faster than Russia? Who is going to outlast the other? Probably that is what is stalling any serious consideration of peace talks. Who is going to get fatigued first?
We'll have to wait and see how that pans out. Ambassador Humphrey Ojiako, Nigeria's former envoy to Switzerland and Liechtenstein, thank you for your time this morning. Please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. Bye.
And after the break, Donetsk Football Club to donate $25 million for Ukrainian soldiers. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Belarus's exiled opposition leader says she does not think Russia would launch an offensive on Ukraine from Belarus after the two countries began military drills, but Moscow could launch more missile strikes from its allies' territory. Moscow and Minsk started joint military exercises yesterday, triggering fears in Kiev and the West that Moscow could use its ally to launch a new ground offensive.
Us to be more brave, more strong, and all of us, everyone of us, believe that war will be finished. We will believe that it will be in 2023 already, because yeah, we liberate our territories, but with future victory costs us a lot of lives.
And that's where we wrap up the program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiri Denwale. Do have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.